Hey, what's going on, YouTube family? What's up, everybody? So, if you're on this video, you're here because you want to learn about gymming in New World and what it does, how it works, and when is a good time to use them. I'm just going to start off pretty basic here. What gyms are? Gyms are these stones that you can get throughout the game. They come in different variety, from your flawed all the way to your pristine. You can cut these by now going to the armorer to cut them. Used to be the stone cutter, but now it's the armorer, where you would then go and cut these gems at all different levels and varieties. What this video is basically going to tell you is kind of how to gym, what to gym for, and when gymming will be good in what scenarios. So starting off, when gymming and looking at gyms, you need to look at what you're using the gyms for exactly and what the gym does. So if we just read, for example, let's start with this tier 2 flawed sapphire, and we just read what the gym does. It says converts 50% of damage dealt to arcane. If focus is higher, replace weapon scaling with focus, but at 35% scaling. So right off the rip, what this should tell you is if you are a healer per se, and you are healing and you are wanting to, let's say, for whatever reason, split this gem, split your staff and put this on a weapon, you will be hurting your DPS no matter what enemy you are fighting, because you are nerfing the 50% of your damage by and taking it down to 35% scaling. So that is something you really need to pay attention to when you are scaling with gems. But on the flip side of that, as a DPSer or even a tank, you're not stacking in focus, right? You're stacking in anything else but that, probably. So when it comes down to it, this is where people make the most critical of mistake. And please don't make this mistake, as I've seen people who, for instance, let's take our great axe here, for example, want to split into another type, and they put a tier 5 pristine cut gem in their weapon. That is a huge no-no. And the reason they do that is because they're totally locked in on the fact that it says each one of these have different scaling. You see 75% scaling here on a pristine. And then if you were to look at a tier 2, you see 45% scaling. Simple thought, if you see 35 versus 75, you're automatically going to jump to, I need to put I want to do most damage, I'm putting the 75 in there. But they skip over the fact that it says if intellect is higher. So this moving down of your damage only happens if you are higher in intellect. That is the only time you need to worry about that. If you are higher in any other stat than intellect, then you can split your damage 50-50 conversion just fine with tier 2 cut gems. This is why I keep a lot of them on me, and this is why I have them. I run a lot of rapier, run a lot of musket, I run a lot of other things that are higher in anything but int or focus. So tier 2 gem splits are the best way to go. I can swap these in and out and break them. They cost less than a gold a piece. I can make them for very, very cheap. They're so easy to come across and easy to swap out. And you can swap these in activities. I do it all the time. And it is the easiest way to get to dip into these other buckets of damage that these enemies are weak to. So keep that in mind. Same thing applies for Fire Staff. Fire Staff, you're running a butt ton of intellect. Be very careful with your splits there, because that's probably the only weapon, that and maybe VG, IG, those weapons are the only ones in which I would say tier 5 gems may make more sense for the splits, because you in those weapons, typically you run more intellect in those, and that's when it would make more sense for you to pay closer attention to what gems you're slotting in. But everything else, pretty much for the most part, you can slap in tier 2s and be just fine. Now, when I say weaknesses that these other enemies have, let me go ahead and segue right into, let's talk about weaknesses that enemies do have. So this is a quick breakdown of Corrupted, Ancient, Angry Earth Lost, Varangian, and Beast. So pretty much all the different type of animals, that type of enemies we have in the game. And on the left side, we have Slash, Thrust, and Strike, and then of course your elements from there on. Every enemy in the game is weak to at least one type of physical damage, but they are not all weak to any sort of elemental damage. That is where the disparity comes in. That's where the difference comes in. That's where it's not equal, and that's where gemming and splitting your gems you have to be careful of. Because while you may think a beast since it's 20% weak to thrust, it must be weak to fire as well. Also, if you take a look here, it's weak to nothing else. So is Varangian's. 20% slash or 20% thrust, that's your go-to. You never should be splitting when you're fighting these enemies. Typically, if you're fighting nothing but Varangians, just do slash. Nothing but beast, just do thrust, and you'll be good to go. No splitting necessary. No splits or gems like that are needed to do so. Just stick straight in thrust or straight in slash. But let's say if we are going to split, when would it be a good idea to do it? This is a controversial topic. Many people would say, oh, it's never a good idea, but I'm on the standpoint of dip into whatever bucket you can. The biggest one that's always talked about is corrupted. For instance, you see 20% slash damage here, and you see 30% arcane. You would think to yourself, okay, well, shoot, why don't I just go ahead and split into arcane, right? Well, it gets there's a little bit more nuance to it than that. When you split your damages in New World, your thrust damage, for instance, if you're running, let's say, a thrust ring or a elemental ring, all those damage conversion numbers are going to happen post calculations of split versus pre-calculation of split. What do I mean by that? I've set up a little example for you guys. I'm going to get my character absolutely naked here for you guys. We're going to take everything we have off, and I am going to slap on this fire damage ring here and this hatchet here. We have just a luck pearl in it right now, so it doesn't give it any sort of boost. And this is not a fire gem in here, so we're just going to go over to this guy here. We're going to give it a smack. Boom, 933. So we're going to hit it again. Hopefully we don't get a crit. And 933. So we see that's consistent baseline damage, okay? So now we are going to split this with a ice one here. And now when we go up and hit, boom, 466 times 2, that's roughly 932, 933. So that's perfect split right there. So now, if it actually does boost your slash damage, as you can see, that's a 50 conversion, we should see an increase on the slash and the elemental side when we add in a slash boost to it here. So for example, I'm going to grab my slash ring. I'm going to slap it on here. So now I should see both sides go up, right? Absolutely not. You see 499 on slash and 466 on your elemental side. That is because when you add either slash, thrust, or elemental, whatever, it is going to add that boost to the post split conversion of your damage. So that is why people say whether or not it makes sense to split on enemies where their weaknesses are so close to one another, 20% versus 30%. Well, you know, if I have the thrust ring on corrupted, then I'm looking at a 27% and then 30% on the arcane. And then if I put an arcane boost, I'm looking at 37 arcane and 20 thrust. It really comes down to the situation of which you think is best. And honestly, in my opinion, I think just running a thrust ring, full out thrust with corrupted is just fine. If you are going to splitting arcane, I would never say to split nature. The only time I would say split nature would be if I was using rapier and I was fighting corrupted and lost, because as you see here, we have 15% nature and we have 30% nature that lost take. So in that regard, you would want to split those. You will want to split those so that you can get the change and the difference in when that elemental nature is applied when using your rapier. So that's the only time you would want to see maybe you would use this. But if you're just fighting straight corrupted, just go straight thrust with a thrust ring or arcane split and still run the thrust ring, right? So it really comes down to that's about the way you want to do your splits. If you're going angry earth though, and I always usually split to fire with angry earth, because as you can see, I'm running rapier a lot. I get no bonuses for running thrust. So I want to do more damage. So damn sure I'm splitting 50% of my damage, and I'm splitting it over to fire, so I can get that 30% boost. I may even slap on a fire damage ring too as well, just to boost that even further. Or if I want to increase my bleeds a little bit more, I will put on a thrust ring, then run the fire split as well. So that's what you got to think about. What does your build really do, right? What are you really after with what you're doing? and trying to do. And if you're running FNF, you know, it's going to be those different things of how your build functions with what you're boosting in your kit. So I would honestly tell you things like this Anger Earth, I would always usually split the fire. But others may say differently because it affects your numbers different. I've always have found splitting fire has been perfectly fine. Bleed pops still hit hard and strong, and we're good with splitting on Angry Earth. So going back to gems, let's talk about gear. And when we're gymming with gear, what exactly are we looking to do? As you can see on the right side, I have multiple gear sets set up on the right here. I have a fire, ice, nature, void, all lined up on the right. Why do I have 4 different sets that look identical with weapon usage? This is the fast swapping technique that we usually use in speed running. And as you can see my numbers here, if you see I'm at 2, you know, I have reset all my stats, so I don't have any stats, anything. So as you can see, whenever I swap between these 2 gear sets, you're seeing the numbers stay relatively the same. We go from 263 strength, we go to 264 strength. And this is so that we can set up a stat structure so that whenever we swap, we don't lose these points that we have in these different nodes. I don't want to drop below 350 I don't want to drop below 350 on strength. I don't want to drop below 200 on dex. So we set up these quick swaps to switch between different elements so that we can be more effective and faster at the activity without having to stop, regem the same gear, then proceed forward. It's totally a speed running tactic, but it's one in which I still do because I still do actively participate in speed runs every now and then. So when you're running gems and you're looking at it, depending on the content you're doing, there's only X amount of gemming that's needed. Right now, I'm sitting at roughly about 56% fire damage with this build here. This build is more than capable of stepping into anything from M1 to M2 and running just fine, and even a lot of dungeons, M3s too as well. Now, there is a rule of thumb in M3s that you full blown go all out gemming, right? You go full max, which cap is 63% on as much elemental resistance as you can. That is also a very popular thing, and that's something that typically is done, yes, 100%. You find yourself it's a little bit harder to do that when you run things like attuned pants. Since New World does not allow you to have multiple artifacts, it puts you in a situation where it's rough to be able to, when you're going fast or quickly, switch gems on your attuned pants mid-stride. So you'll find that a lot of times we go with an opal instead of that actual one to kind of finagle the numbers a little bit. And the reason we go with opal is because opal gives you 2.5% elemental absorbage across the board to all elements instead of the focused 6% that you get by having it all in just one element. So that's where you hear people talk a lot about running opal sets and opal builds, and that is because that's what they want to do. And then of course each set is paired with its own type of protection for that particular type. So I will have a fire amulet on my fire, ice amulet on my ice build, nature, so on and so on, right? That is how you want to set these up and gem accordingly when you do it. There are also other things to do that you can do, such as rune glass. I think I'm going to cover rune glass itself in a separate video, so stay tuned for that. But as far as gemming is concerned, I would recommend you can get away with just an amulet and all opals when running M1s to M2s. You can totally get away with that. So for instance, I do that a lot on my rapier build. When I run it, doing my dailies, my musket boy here, I'll slap on this build and I'll have 15 and all these different ones. And then whatever activity it is, I'll just put on that particular neck. And as you can see, boom, there we go. We're at 36% on nature. And if I was to have those gloves pushed over to nature, I'd be roughly right about 40%, which is more than enough to take care of an M1 or more than enough for M1 and just enough for an M2. So this is a way for you to kind of run maybe a different kind of build if you want to, if you don't want to run your typical normal full sets that you have set up over here. But that is pretty much the gist of how you gem in New World. Remember, key takeaway here, guys. Make sure if you're splitting and you're not running high int and high int or high focus, always go with tier 2 slots into your weapons. That does not apply to your gear, by the way. You still run tier 5s for gear resistances. And then if you are running high int and high focus, you go with your tier 5 slots. Get your ammies together to pair with the right gems for you to put on these different sets. And by all means, start when you're farming out there and you know you're getting this gear over and over again, start making duplicate sets of what you run primarily and make them fit for different elemental types. You'll thank me later. I appreciate you guys for tuning in the video. I know it's a bit of a longer one, but catch me out on twitch.tv/BabyFNelson if you got any more questions. It's your boy, and we out.